The OPW's out of control, I tell you. They're dragging Cork City and everyone in it towards an avoidable disaster. They're planning a massive and irreversible infrastructure project, and the city is powerless to stop it. It took 2 years to repave McCurtain Street, so how long do you think it will take to rebuild the entire city centre? Because that's what's coming. Instead of building a tidal barrier, offshore, efficient and climate-proof, the plan is to dig up 14 kilometres of the city's streets, raise the quay walls, install 46 pumps, each the size of a double-decker bus, and disrupt everything for years. Cork is already one of the most gridlocked cities in the world. It's actually in the top 1%, and this will plunge it into chaos beyond imagination. The cost of the project has already increased by 43% since it was initially conceived, with almost 17 million having already been spent. This has national scandal written all over it, and that's before the real problems even begin. Because Cork isn't just any city, it was built on a marsh. Beneath the streets lie a maze of buried rivers and an unstable water table that no amount of computer modelling can predict. And yet, this is the plan, approved in Dublin and sold to us as flood relief. But it isn't relief. It's institutional dishonesty, a politically convenient plan from a department more interested in saving face than saving the city, and I think it's time we said so, just so we're all on the same page. Just beyond Cork Harbour lies Roach's Point, and this is where the story could have changed. A tidal barrier here was one of 3 sites examined by the OPW, but this one in particular was dismissed. Despite being no deeper or wider than tidal barriers already operating in places like the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy and Russia, Roach's Point was singled out as too difficult, too costly, too complex, almost as if the goal was to make it look insurmountable. And yet, since this site was first considered in 2017, the science has only grown more urgent. Sea level projections are far worse than expected. What once looked like a future threat is now forecast within 50 years. The quay walls actually do very little to protect Cork from the rising sea levels. They're designed to defend against flooding from the river. Even in the OPW's own report, they say a tidal barrier will eventually be needed. So why, in the face of that reality, is the government still planning years of chaos? It's called institutional malfeasance, a case of the 17 million they've already spent on the project mixed with the bureaucratic stubbornness and a refusal to adapt. They committed to the quay walls, and now no matter how much the landscape has changed in the preceding years, they won't admit they got it wrong. At some point, it stopped being about flood prevention and started being about the OPW protecting its own position. If an independent body conducted a review today, it would likely conclude that a tidal barrier is the only real long-term solution to protect Cork against flooding. But the OPW doesn't want an independent review because it would mean facing the reality that their plan is already obsolete. And because of their refusal to acknowledge reality, incredible sums of money will be spent on a solution that will not protect Cork from flooding. The OPW never wanted to build a tidal barrier. They just wanted to justify the quay walls. And now, instead of changing course, they're dragging Cork and you and me and everybody else towards an avoidable disaster. Their reports were written in 2017, a time when sea level rise projections were far more conservative. And in the 8 years since, the worst case predictions have already been blown past. Sea levels aren't just rising, they're rising faster than expected. The quay walls don't protect the lower harbour. They do nothing for the growing suburbs around Tivoli, Dunkettle and Little Island, areas that will be underwater within decades. That's probably why, in their own reports, the OPW acknowledges that a tidal barrier will eventually be needed. But rather than pushing ahead with the real solution, let's spend a decade on a plan that won't work. If you wake up with night terrors about this like I do, You're probably wondering, how is this even still going ahead? What with all the scientific evidence piling up against it? And the answer to that question is institutional inertia. The plan is moving forward only because it's already in motion. If the OPW were unveiling a flood defence scheme for Cork today, they'd be unveiling a tidal barrier. But in a system like this, admitting failure isn't an option. Protecting the plan matters more than protecting the place. To backtrack now would mean admitting their mistake, which I'm fine with. We learn from our mistakes. But all of this is more than just bad planning. It's part of something deeper. Because Cork doesn't get a say in its own flood defences. That decision is made in Dublin. The original renders were an affront to the city, a visceral glimpse of what the OPW thought they could get away with. From the very beginning, the Quay Walls project has felt like something being done to Cork, not for it. Carving through the historic quays, severing Cork from its river. Later digital renders softened the visuals. No traffic, no construction, no disruption, just glass railings, blue skies, and me paddleboarding on the river having a great time. But the damage was already done. To build this scheme, you need to dig behind the quay walls, relocate services, lay deep foundations, install 46 mechanical pumps, each one the size of a shipping container, rebuild roads, reinforce buildings, and do all of that in a city that can barely handle roadworks on a single street? We've all seen what happens when Cork is under construction. McCurtain Street took 2 years, and that was just one street. Now imagine a decade-long effort to underpin and reinforce century-old quay walls, excavate foundations without collapsing nearby buildings, and reroute traffic, all while maintaining flood defences. They say it will cost 200 million, but I think we both know the real cost will be a lot more than that. In OPW terms, they could do it all for less than 600 bike sheds. And for what? A system that will be redundant by 2075. This isn't about protecting Cork, it's about controlling it. Because if Cork had real power, real autonomy, this plan wouldn't have made it off the drawing board. Do you think there was anyone in Cork City Hall thinking, yeah, I see it now. This is a great plan for Cork. It only exposes more systemic dysfunction in how the country is run, because local government shouldn't be so easily co-opted by the all-powerful OPW. But in Ireland, when bad plans come from above, there's no mechanism to stop them, no accountability, no local veto. It's the result of a system designed a century ago, where local governments are stripped of power, and where even a major city like Cork has to beg for the right to shape its own future. Winning independence wasn't easy, and when we did, we were a country in survival mode. What little money existed was concentrated in Dublin, and so power was centralised. There was no room to let local councils make costly mistakes. 100 years ago, that made sense. But today, with apparently zero effort to modernise, it's a system that is crippling Ireland. As Dr. Aodh Quinlivan puts it, Ireland is one of the most centralised democracies in the developed world. Local government doesn't govern, it administers, content to accept city-altering decisions made somewhere else, and Cork is living with the consequences. But not just Cork. Across Ireland, cities, towns and villages are failing to live up to their full potential. For real change, we must hand power to local authorities. Well-run councils will have areas thriving, poorly run councils will quickly change. Cities like Waterford, Cork, Limerick and Galway have growing populations, booming industries and unique local challenges. Yet semi-state bodies and national agencies in Dublin still make decisions for cities they don't even live in. And the results are genuinely painful. Decisions take years, local voices are ignored, and our cities are strangled by bureaucracy. We don't have to guess what happens when cities are allowed to control their own future. We just have to look at countries where they do. In Switzerland, power is decentralised, and local governments have control over planning, infrastructure and services. In Denmark, cities like Aarhus and Odense have been able to fund and deliver their own urban renewal projects, transforming themselves into two of the most livable cities in Europe. Even in Germany, city-led governance is robust, with local administrations empowered to design policies that actually fit their communities, instead of waiting for a distant national government to decide what's best. It all points to the same outcome: faster decision-making, greater accountability, and better infrastructure. Right now, Cork's fate is at the mercy of decisions made in government offices hundreds of kilometres away. If we don't change that, this won't stop at flood prevention. Major projects will continue to be imposed without any local consultation. This is a broken system that forces Cork to accept bad decisions from Dublin, even when they make no sense. Because once you start pulling at the threads of this plan, it all starts to feel familiar. The logic unravels, the justifications don't hold, and of course, it gets worse. The OPW talk about the River Lee as if it's a 1970s Irwin Allen disaster movie, ready to explode at a moment's notice.
Can you hear it?
Yes, we can hear it. Get out of there.
No use. Get the big one, Paul. Get it.
They often point to the 2009 flood as the reason a tidal barrier won't work. That flood, they say, came from the river, not from the sea. But what they won't say is this: the 2009 flood was a man-made disaster. Atrocious dam management, in a nutshell. The ESB released a massive volume of water from the Inniscarra and Carrigadroha dams after failing to manage reservoir levels in the lead up to a storm. When the water reached tipping point, they had no choice but to release it, creating one of the worst floods in Cork's history. All because they couldn't flip the right switches and turn the right levers in the run-up to a forecasted storm. Just wow. The OPW's argument hinges on this: that since a tidal barrier wouldn't have stopped the 2009 flood, it's not a viable solution. But that logic only holds if you accept brutally mismanaged dams as a given. Because if you ask a different question, what if flood control became the primary objective during a flood event and hydropower was temporarily made secondary, the answer changes dramatically. Hydrologists at UCC have shown with this shift in priority, up to 70% of a flood's peak volume can be attenuated. More than enough to protect the city without tearing up Cork. Incredible. If used correctly, dams can also aid in flood management. I never knew. All that's required is a small change to the current statutory framework, one that allows dams to prioritise flood control over hydropower during extraordinary events. And yet this entire scenario has already been solved. Use dams to control the river, use a tidal barrier to control the sea, and leave the city intact. It's the vision put forward by the Save Cork City campaign, a group of architects, engineers and urban planners who've challenged the OPW's plans from the beginning. Because Cork isn't like other towns. It's built on a marsh, laced with buried culverts, sewers, middens, and rivers that rise from below. The idea that you can contain all of that within concrete walls and pump stations, it's engineering arrogance, not an engineering marvel. But it doesn't have to be this way. What does taking control of our future actually look like? It looks like the harbour, specifically Little Island. Further upstream from Roach's Point, this was one of 3 sites originally examined by the OPW. But unlike Roach's Point, Little Island makes more sense. Half the depth, half the width, much less cost and disruption, it's a natural bottleneck, perfect for managing tidal flow. If cost was the OPW's main concern, then this should have been the frontrunner. But it wasn't chosen, because real alternatives were never seriously considered. The OPW claim, incredibly, that they're following best international practice. But you won't find a single city in the world that has tackled flooding by raising quay walls as its primary solution. Not one, I checked. Best practice means tidal barriers, managed retreat, integrated, future-focused infrastructure. London has one, Venice has one, Rotterdam has one, even New York is building one. But Cork? Well, Cork is getting the world's most expensive wall that no other city has ever tried. They say Little Island would interfere with shipping lanes, but that argument is already out of date. The port of Cork has moved to Ringaskiddy. Tivoli is being redeveloped as a neighbourhood. By the time a tidal barrier would be built, there'll be no major port operations left within the harbour. A tidal barrier at Little Island would protect Cork and the lower harbour. It would stop flooding at its source before it reaches the city. But the OPW never wanted to build a tidal barrier. So instead of changing course, they buried the best option. And now they're pushing ahead with the worst. All while the real defence sits untouched just off Little Island. And if the basin of Lochmahan isn't large enough, a similar structure, pivoted towards Merino Point, with a sluice gate at Belvelly, would create an even greater basin. It's not that the solutions don't exist, it's that they refuse to look. This is a choice between denial and direction, between protecting power and protecting the city, between a scar through Cork and a future for it. Because if Dublin were facing the same threat Cork was, Dublin would get a tidal barrier. But here, we have to fight. We don't need another national scandal. We need a tidal barrier. And if the people in charge won't protect Cork, then Cork will have to protect itself. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's a crisis of will. Up to 60% of upper floors in Irish city centres are vacant. Thousands of people commute into these cities every single day, while right above them, thousands of rooms lie completely empty, in the middle of a city, within walking distance of everything they need. Other countries don't let their historic cores rot. Why do we?